It's not corn in every country. Other countries use something called switchgrass. There's some countries in South America that use sugar cane. But in the United States, when we want to use organic material, plant material for fuel, we typically use corn. Um, this has become a little bit of an issue because we have so many people to feed and we need this corn to feed people. And now we're taking a good chunk of our corn crop and using it to make fuel. This is a problem because it has caused a scarcity of corn. When that happens, there's not enough corn for us to feed our cattle, our livestock, feed ourselves. It's going to, in the economy, cause an increase in the price of other staples. If there's no corn, well, then we're all going to have to eat wheat, or we're all going to have to eat soy, and it's going to drive up the prices of the other crops as well. So there is a big debate on the efficiency of biofuels. How good are they at creating energy? How can we run our cars on them? And in addition to that debate, there's a debate about whether or not we even should be using the corn for the fuel, because maybe we need to be using that corn to feed people. There are definite successes with biofuels. If we can use these biofuels, we can decrease our dependence on fossil fuels, decrease our dependence on other countries, not have to worry about importing fuels from other areas. Again, just a really quick little explanation of this so that you have that idea in the back of your mind. We will come back and explore how effective biofuels are, what percent of the corn is used in a later chapter. Okay. So let's move on and look at some issues that occur with this large industrialized farming and some of the things that we've had to do worldwide to ensure that we have enough food for all people. One thing that we've had to do to maintain the amount of food is use chemicals in our farming. And these chemicals in general are referred to as pesticides. If you want to write down a quick definition for yourself, a pest is defined as anything that damages crops. So that's a very simple, easy definition. A pest is anything that damages crops. And pesticides, you see here, you can have insecticides, herbicides, fungicides. So insecticides kill insects, herbicides kill weeds. Weeds are any plant that's competing with the crop that you want to grow. So herbicides kill those weeds. Fungicides are kill funguses that hurt your plants. So there's many different types of pesticides. The pests can be insects, weeds, fungus, anything that would damage your crops. Okay. In the United States, we use a lot of pesticides. It's estimated that we use about 400 million kilograms of pesticides in the United States every single year. And of that amount, about 3/4 is used in commercial agriculture. The rest of it's used in landscaping in our yards, in our homes, but not for agriculture. So we use a lot of this pesticide at all times. The usage in about the last decade has leveled off in developing nations. Developing nations have continued to use about the same amount of pesticide every year. But the usage amounts in developing nations is still rapidly increasing. So we do have that balance again between what's going on in the developing nations and the developed. Developing nations are still increasing their use of these pesticides, while developed nations have kind of leveled off their use. Pesticides have obviously some benefits, but there's going to be some drawbacks. So let's talk about some of the topics that come up with pesticides. First off, with the pesticides, we would talk about something called the evolutionary arms race. Obviously something about evolution. Here's the idea of the evolutionary arms race. Evolutionary arms race says that if we're going to go use a pesticide and we're going to spray it on a field, there is no way that that pesticide will kill every single pest in the field. And the few pests that do survive will have an evolutionary resistance over time to the pesticide. So let's go through that again. I'm a farmer. I put pesticides out on my field, and I kill, let's say, every single pest in that field. 10,000 pests die, but 5 of them survive. Those 5 are the strongest and somehow must have the genetics to allow them to resist the pesticide. If those 5 pests now are the only ones alive that can reproduce, they're going to pass those strong resistant genes on to their offspring. And over time, every year when I apply this pesticide, if the strongest pests survive, eventually they will find a way to no longer be affected by the pesticides. So we have to constantly develop stronger pesticides and constantly change them, put more of them on the field to combat the fact that evolution will allow the strongest pests to survive. This idea is called the evolutionary arms race. Okay? It's called a race because it's a competition between the farmers and the pests. I'm going to put down pesticide, but I know some of them are going to survive, and it's constantly going to drive. I need more pesticide, I get stronger pests. I need better pesticide, I get stronger pests. Because of this arms race, some scientists, some farmers have looked to other methods for getting rid of pests. One of those other methods is a biological control, biocontrol. In biocontrol, instead of putting out pesticides and chemicals, I'm going to use living things. I'm going to use living things to try to get rid of some of my pests. An example of this is shown in the pictures below. This is a caterpillar of, or a larva of a cactus moth. And this cactus moth was used in the 1920s in Australia. So if you look at this picture here on the left, you'll see all throughout the field down here a whole bunch of prickly pear. And the prickly pear was an invasive species. It was taking over the fields, not giving farmers a place to plant their crops. And instead of trying to kill off all this prickly pear with an herbicide, the farmers here and the scientists here realized that they could introduce this cactus moth because the cactus moth likes to eat the prickly pear. So this is an example of biocontrol. In a matter of only a few years, this is what that same area looked like. You'll notice here there's no more cactus moth. I'm sorry, no more prickly pear. So this is an example of a successful case of biocontrol, using a living organism to get rid of a pest. In this case, the pest was the prickly pear plant. It's a little cactus-looking plant, rather than putting down a whole bunch of chemical. Another very common example of biocontrol is the use of a bacteria called Bacillus thuringiensis. Let me spell it for you. It's Bacillus, B-A-C-I-L-L-U-S, and then Thuringiensis. Now the good news about this bacteria is that you never have to actually memorize how to spell that name or how to say it, because we simply call this BT. So that's how I'll refer to it. That's how you can refer to it. BT is a bacteria that we can put into and genetically modify into our crops, and we have into most of our corn crops, that will kill caterpillars, will kill flies, will kill beetles. So instead of having to spray our corn crops with insecticide, we simply implant this gene into them, and this is a form of biocontrol. BT corn is a very common thing. If you ever drive, through Iowa in the summer, you may see signs, if you look carefully on the fields, that say, this is BT corn from Monsanto. Right now, what is the reality of the situation? The reality of the situation is that most farmers are using what is called integrated pest management. Right now, most farmers are using a balance between chemicals and biocontrol. They're trying to do a little bit of both. And this is, of course, I'm just talking about the United States and developed nations, where we have this ability to have a reduction in the amount of chemicals and an increase in some of these more natural ways of stopping pests. I want you to stop here and take some time to watch a second video. So again, you're going to pause this and go watch these two YouTube clips. These two YouTube clips look at another problem, another invasive species called kudzu. And this is an invasive species situation that is occurring right now in the United States. I want you to watch the video on top first to kind of get an idea of what this plant is and how quickly it'll grow, and then watch the video on the bottom second, because this video actually shows a really great solution to what we were just talking about, of possibly using this kudzu as a biofuel rather than using our corn crops as a biofuel. So two very short videos. Take some time, put some notes on the next slide, and when you're done, come back, and we're just going to talk a little bit more about the current situation of farming in the United States. So we just spent a whole bunch of time talking about pests and how we have to get rid of pests in our fields. We also want to remember that some of those pests are actually very necessary for pollinating our crops. Some insects are needed. You couldn't grow the crop without them. In the United States, most of our staple crops are actually derived from grasses, and grasses pollinate with wind. And so a lot of our major crops, we don't think about pollinators, our corn and our wheat, because they're just pollinated by the wind most of the time. But there's over 800 plants that actually need bees and other insects to pollinate them. I want to give you some examples of what types of organisms are pollinating the foods that you eat. You don't have to write these down. I just want you to have an idea of all these different types of pollinators. About 19% of plants are pollinated by flies. About 5% of those 800 are pollinated by wasps, 5% by beetles, 4% by moths and butterflies. 6.5% of those 800 plants are pollinated by bats, 4% by birds. So there are many different pollinators that we have to maintain. We can't accidentally, in our race to get rid of all the pests, get rid of all these pollinators. The one that we hear the most about, and one that I would not be surprised to see on an AP test question, because this is a very current topic, are bees. Bees are a pollinator we're all familiar with. We've known about this since we were little kids. We know the bees go from flower to flower and collect the nectar and pollinate the plants. But if you look at this graph, there are some plants that are very dependent on bees. Most predominantly in this graph, the almonds, the grapes, and the blueberries. They really could not survive without the bees pollinating them. And there are currently two major issues that are going on. One major issue from two different parasites that are going on with our bee population. The major issue is called colony collapse disorder, and it's been caused by the spread of these two different parasitic mites. And some say that these mites are increasing in number because of climate change, maybe because of some other reasons. But regardless why the mites are there, the mites have started rapidly decreasing the populations of bees. We've lost about a third of the bee population since just 2006. So this is a topic that I would not be surprised at all to see on the AP test, because it's very current. And you could discuss the fact that we need these pollinators, and we have to be careful to not be killing them when we're killing some of the other pests, and what are we going to have to do to possibly help increase the amount of bees? And could some of the other pollinators come in and take the place? Or is there too close of an association between the bees and these plants? So again, being aware of that colony collapse disorder, that it's killed off so many of the bees so quickly. Over 800 of our plants, are dependent on those pollinators. Another big issue that we hear a lot about with modern farming, with this industrialized farming, are genetically modified organisms, or GMOs. And what GMOs are, let's write down a definition here. They are organisms that have DNA from multiple organisms. So it's a single organism or a single species that actually has DNA within it from multiple organisms. It's not just corn DNA anymore. It's corn DNA with several other pieces of DNA from different species mixed into the corn DNA. Okay? The DNA that's mixed in is called recombinant DNA. Okay? That's the DNA that's been recombined from multiple other species. Once an organism has DNA from other species within it, we call that a transgenic organism. And this is what we started off the chapter talking about. This is the issue that's going on in Mexico. Some of the native corn species there, when we look at the DNA, are no longer just corn. They have bred with some of our genetically modified corn from the United States, and now we have some of these native corn species that are mixed. They're no longer native. They're no longer purebred. This is something we could go into great detail about, of how you get a genetically modified organism.